Hello, and welcome to the Sleep Haunt. If you're new here, please subscribe and like the video to support the channel. You can also support us by sending a super thanks on this video. Your support truly helps the channel grow. Now, relax and enjoy the story.
Story number 1. The highway at 3 in the morning was a quiet thing, stretched thin beneath a sky the color of cooled ash. Ray's rig moved through it like a slow, patient animal, engine humming low, headlights carving twin tunnels in the dark. Inside the cab, the world was narrowed to the soft glow of the dashboard, the faint rattle from the empty cup holder, and the constant, soothing thrum of diesel beneath the floor. The road ahead was a two-lane ribbon, curving in and out of low hills and stands of dark trees. Old Route 17 had a way of feeling older than the maps admitted, its pavement patched and mended in long gray seams, its shoulders narrow, its guardrails dented and dulled. The newer interstate lay miles away, a straighter, faster vein of light and noise. Out here, the traffic was sparse, and the night felt thick and private, as if the rest of the world had quietly looked away. Ray's thermos sat beside him, half empty and cooling. He rolled his shoulders once, feeling the stiffness bite across his back. The clock on the dash read 3:12 a.m. He was between towns, between exits, between anything that could be called company. The CB on the dash muttered now and then, distant voices fading in and out, scattered talk of weather and miles. But even that had grown infrequent, as if the night had gently taken everyone else off the channel. Ahead, the first fingers of fog appeared, silver-gray veils that slid across the asphalt. They glowed softly in the headlight beams, parting and thinning as the truck plowed through them. Then they thickened, quietly, without drama, like breath on glass. In a matter of minutes, the world beyond the windshield shrank to a pale oval of light and a suggestion of trees on either side, dark columns rising out of milk. Ray eased off the accelerator, watching the speedometer dip. The fog had that heavy, wet look, what other drivers like to call pea soup. It dampened sound as it swallowed sight. Even the engine felt muffled, contained within a soft, invisible wall. The white lines on the road rose to meet him and fell away again in a monotone rhythm. They're gone, they're gone. He leaned forward a little out of habit, as if his body could somehow get closer to what his eyes strained to see. The cab felt smaller, cozier, the air warmed by the vents, the glass lightly filmed with condensation at the edges where the defroster didn't quite reach. Outside, there was nothing but fog and the steady whisper of tires on damp pavement. The CB crackled suddenly, a brief burst of static, then a voice, distant and thin. 17's socked in tonight, watch that southbound. Can't see a mile ahead. The transmission faded mid-sentence. Ray reached for the dial, but there was only a soft hiss now, like wind over a bottle. He left it on, low, something for the silence to lean against. The sign appeared out of nowhere, rising up from the fog as if it had grown there. Green background, white letters beaded with moisture. Rest Haven Diner, 1 mile, exit 42. The reflective paint flashed back his headlights and then was swallowed again. Ray frowned slightly. He knew this stretch, or thought he did. He didn't remember any exit 42B, and he'd never heard anyone mention a rest haven out here. Still, the thought of hot coffee and a chance to stretch had a weight of its own. Fog curled across the hood. The world was shrinking to the length of his headlights and the arc of his wipers. He rolled his sore shoulder again, fingers flexing on the wheel. Fatigue had a way of making time wobble. Maybe he'd passed this exit a dozen times and never paid it any mind. Places like that existed all over the country, quiet little diners that never made an appearance on any GPS, known only to the ones who needed them in the small hours. The next sign came a moment later, smaller, crouched at the edge of the right lane. Exit 42B, 1/4 mile. An arrow pointed to a break in the guardrail, almost invisible in the fog until he was nearly on top of it. Ray flicked on his turn signal out of habit, though there was no one behind him to see it, and guided the rig off the main road. The ramp seemed longer than it should have been. The curve bent gently to the right, then to the right again, a slow spiral that never quite straightened out. The fog grew denser here, pressed close against the guardrail, clinging to the grass and the low shrubs beyond. The truck's headlights bounced off it, sending back a familiar, diffuse glare. Ray's fingers tightened on the wheel, a small reflex. It was just fog, just a lonely exit at 3 in the morning. At last the ramp emptied into a flat, cracked parking lot. The asphalt was slick with moisture, glistening like dark glass in the beam of his lights. Ahead, half obscured by mist, stood a small, low building with a peaked roof and a row of dark windows. Over the door, a neon sign hummed weakly. Rest Haven Diner, the letters glowing a tired, buttery yellow. The sign's buzzing seemed too loud in the hush, the only sound in a world muffled by wet air. There was one other truck in the lot, parked perfectly straight near the edge of the light. It was an old cab-over model, the kind that rarely showed up on the roads anymore, its paint a faded blue that still managed to shine faintly under the neon. No company logo, no lettering on the trailer, just a blank, clean surface beaded with tiny drops of fog-borne water. Ray parked a few spaces away, killed the engine, and was immediately struck by the silence. Without the hum of the motor, the world felt hollowed out, the fog pressing closer. He could hear the faint ticking of his cooling engine, the soft patter of condensation slipping off the mirrors. Far away, or maybe only in his imagination, there was a sound like a single car rushing past on the highway above, then nothing. He pulled on his jacket, opened the door, and climbed down into the cool, damp air. The fog brushed his face, soft and chill, carrying the subtle scent of wet asphalt and distant pine. His boots made dull, muted sounds on the pavement as he crossed toward the diner, each step swallowed almost before it landed. Inside, the bell above the door chimed, a bright, homey sound that seemed out of place in the grayness. Warmth wrapped around him as he stepped in, along with the familiar smells of strong coffee, frying onions, and that indefinable diner scent, old grease, dish soap, and a hint of something sweet. The place looked like a postcard from another decade. Vinyl booths lined the windows, their red cushions worn to a soft shine. The counter was a long stretch of faded laminate, topped with napkin dispensers and chrome sugar shakers. A ceiling fan turned lazily overhead, stirring the air without hurry. At the far end, a wall clock ticked, the second hand gliding in steady, silent jumps. The calendar beside it showed a month long past, the picture a sunlit field of wheat beneath a blue summer sky. There were a few figures scattered through the booths. A man in a work jacket sat with his hands wrapped around a mug, eyes down, unmoving. In another booth, a couple sat side by side, not touching, staring out into the fog-thick darkness beyond the glass. Their faces were calm, almost peaceful, as if they were listening to something only they could hear. Behind the counter, a woman in a pale blue uniform wiped a spotless section of laminate, her movements slow and gentle. She looked up as Ray approached, and her smile came easily, as though she'd been expecting him. "Evenin', Ray," she said, and her voice was soft, not much louder than the tick of the clock. "Fog's thick out there tonight." He paused, one hand still on the back of the nearest stool. For a moment, the word snagged in his mind. She said his name. He tried to remember if he'd ever been here before, on some long-ago run when miles blurred together, when any coffee and warm light felt like home. "Yeah," he answered, easing himself onto the stool. "Came down all of a sudden. Always does this time of night." She reached for a mug without asking, filled it from the pot and set it down before him. "You still take it black." He looked at the coffee, then at her. Her hair was tied up in a loose knot, a few strands escaping to frame her face. There was nothing strange about her, not really. She looked like a dozen diner servers he'd seen over the years, kind eyes, a tiredness at the corners of her mouth that didn't quite take away the warmth of her smile. "Guess I do," he said slowly. "Must be a creature of habit." "Aren't we all?" She moved away down the counter, refilling a mug that didn't look empty, straightening a menu that wasn't crooked. The coffee was hot, almost too hot, but it had flavor and it went down easy. As he drank, Ray let his gaze drift around the room. The radio on a shelf behind the counter murmured a low tune, something old, all soft piano and distant strings. Now and then, a voice came on between songs, a local announcer with a calm, rounded tone, talking about a storm front moving through counties whose names felt like they belonged a state away, or perhaps a decade. He glanced at the clock. The hands read 3:28. The second hand crept past the 12, started its circuit again. Time here seemed slightly thicker, like honey that hadn't quite warmed. In the reflection on the window, he could see himself at the counter, hunched over his cup, the line of his shoulders tense and tired. Behind him, the booths showed as dark smudges, silhouettes without detail. The couple near the window were shapes of gray on gray. When he turned slightly to look at them directly, they were there, perfectly clear. When he looked back at their reflection, they were only shadows. He took another drink. The coffee never cooled. Outside, the fog pressed against the glass, luminous under the diner's lights. Every now and then it seemed to thin, almost imperceptibly, as if something large was moving through it out in the parking lot. A slow shape, never quite resolving itself, then gone. He finished the coffee and found the mug still half full. He didn't remember her refilling it. The clock now read 3:29. Ray slid a few bills onto the counter, more than enough for the drink, and stood. The woman appeared at his elbow, as if she'd been waiting for that exact moment. "You be careful getting back on the road," she said. "That stretch ahead can be tricky when the fog settles in." "You've driven it?" he asked, more to have something to say than out of real curiosity. She smiled, but the expression didn't quite reach her eyes this time. "We've all driven it," she said, "one way or another." The bell chimed as he pushed the door open. The fog met him like an old friend, damp and cool, brushing at his cheeks. Behind him, the diner's lights cast a soft, yellow rectangle onto the wet pavement, a little island of warmth in a gray sea. Back in the cab, he sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel, listening to the engine come back to life. The dashboard clock read 4:41. He blinked, checked it again. A faint frown creased his brow. In the diner, it had barely reached 3:30. Out here, the night had slipped forward more than an hour. He thought of the clock on the wall, the patient tick, the slow passage of the second hand. Just a mistake with the dash clock, he told himself. Or maybe he'd simply sat longer than he thought, lost in the comfort of hot coffee and soft music. Fatigue played tricks. Time on the road could do that, bending at the edges, pooling and thinning in strange ways. He pulled out of the lot. The ramp back to the highway was shorter this time, or seemed to be. The fog began to break as soon as he merged with the main road, torn into drifting shreds by a faint, high wind. Within 10 minutes, the air was almost clear. The sky overhead had begun its slow, dark twindigo shift that hinted of morning. Ray glanced in the mirror, expecting to see the green glow of the exit sign diminishing behind him, the faint smear of the diner's neon. There was only unbroken guardrail and trees. Daylight found him hours later, near a small town where the highway widened and joined with an interstate. At a fuel stop, under a blue sky rinsed clean of clouds, he pulled out his atlas. Old Route 17 ran across the page in a thin line of ink. He traced it with a finger, searching for exit 42B for any mention of a Rest Haven diner. There was nothing, just a stretch of road between mile markers, unnamed and ordinary, threading through empty country. Now and then on later runs, the fog would come down on that section of highway, thick and insistent. In the distance, lights would blur and bloom, and shapes would waver at the edge of sight. Some nights, the CB would crackle with voices speaking of a place out there where the coffee was always hot, where the clocks never quite agreed with the outside world, and where a tired driver might find, for a brief, borrowed hour, the feeling of being expected and known. And when the fog was just right, and the clocks all ran a little slow, the highway would remember where to bend, quietly, toward the place that didn't appear on any map at all. Story number 2. The mountains were a suggestion long before they showed themselves. a darker weight against a sky that had gone from black to deep, grainy charcoal. Lena's rig climbed in long, patient pulls, the engine a steady, almost comforting rumble beneath her feet. Ahead, the highway coiled toward higher ground, two pale lanes edged by cold metal guardrail and shadowed slopes of pine. It was the hour when the world felt tired in its bones. The dashboard clock crept toward 2:47 a.m. The radio had turned woolly with static, the last clear station fading behind her miles ago. In the sleeper berth, a blanket corner had worked itself loose, hanging like a small, worn flag that swayed with each subtle shift of the truck. The fog began as a faint haze, a softening at the edge of the headlights. It lay in shallow patches at first, settled in the dips between hills like breath that hadn't yet dissipated. Lena watched it gather as the elevation climbed, a pale, wispy thing that clung to the asphalt, then rose waist-high, then shoulder-high. The further she went, the thicker it grew, until the trees thinned into ghosts and the guardrail became a shining, wet line beside her. She eased off the accelerator, feeling the subtle drag as the rig adjusted to the new speed. The fog swallowed the high beams in a bright, useless blur, so she kept the lights low, cutting out just enough of the world ahead to move into it slowly, carefully. The road markers, short posts tipped with reflective caps, appeared and vanished like tiny lighthouses, one after another. The CB had been quiet for nearly an hour when it crackled, sudden and soft, like a breath catching in a throat. "Northbound, you up on Summit yet?" a voice asked, male low with the rasp of long miles in it. The sound cut through the fog-bound silence of the cab. Lena reached for the mic, eyes never leaving the faint twin lines of paint ahead. "Yeah," she said, her voice steady. "Climbing now, fog's like soup." "Yeah, that's how it gets," the voice replied. "You'll want to watch it up past mile 72. Rockslide took out the main lane. They got you on a detour." She thought about the road ahead. No alerts had pinged her phone, but reception had been spotty for the last 20 miles. "Copy," she said. "Didn't see any signs yet." "You will," the voice answered, like someone who'd driven this stretch too many times to count. "Old Summit Road. Steep but safe if you take it nice and slow. Just don't miss the turn. Fog likes to hide it." The connection hissed, then smoothed. The CB light glowed an unblinking red. Lena's fingers tightened around the wheel just enough for the leather to creak. She'd run this route often, but not always at this hour, not always in weather that seemed to erase the world a few feet at a time. The sign appeared as if it had grown from the fog itself. "Detour, Rockslide ahead, Old Summit RD." An arrow pointed right, toward a narrower strip of pavement cutting away from the main highway. Beyond it, only more white, thick and unbroken. She flicked on her signal, though there was no one to see it. The rig responded to the wheel's gentle pull, tires humming a slightly different pitch as they crossed onto the side road. The surface here was older, the seams more pronounced. The fog hugged it tighter, as though this path belonged more to it than to her. "Got you on the turn," the CB voice said, so quiet it almost blended with the static. "Just follow it up. It'll bring you back to the main line after the slide." Lena glanced once at the empty passenger seat, an old habit when the air felt too full of unseen company. "Appreciate it," she said. "You up ahead or behind?" "Call it up ahead," the voice answered. "Been here." While Old Summit Road rose in a series of gentle but insistent grades. The trees pressed closer, tall dark shapes barely hinted at beyond the milky air. Overhead, the sky was gone, replaced by a luminous blanket that turned her headlights into a tight, glowing tunnel. The outside world shrank to sound in a small, glowing wedge of sight. The low growl of the engine, the whisper of tires on damp asphalt, the slow pulse of the wipers. From time to time, a patch of gravel whispered under her wheels, brief and scratchy, then smoothed again. On the right, where the shoulder fell away, the fog was bottomless, a pale gulf whose depth her lights couldn't reach. The guardrail tracked her faithfully, beads of moisture along its length glittering like a faint, watery constellation. "How's your temp?" the voice asked, companionable, as if they were sharing coffee at some midnight counter instead of words through wavering air. Cool enough, Lena said, checking the gauge, though she already knew. The numbers were steady, just heavy. That kind of night, he replied. Big sky above the lid. Stars are good up here when you can see 'em. She imagined it. The fog peeled back, the sky diamond clear and wide, the stars pressing down like a quiet crowd. On nights like this, it felt as if they'd all gone somewhere else, leaving only the soft light inside the cab and the glow of the dash. The road tightened into a curve. She downshifted, letting the engine hold the weight. The rig responded with a low, controlled rumble. The reflective caps along the edge of the pavement flickered by, marking the curve's shape more faithfully than the hidden edge of the asphalt itself. The radio, long silent, chose that moment to find a station, just for a heartbeat. A thin thread of an old song rose and vanished before any words could be made out. In its wake, the fog seemed to press closer against the glass. "How many times you run this way?" the CB voice asked. "Enough to know it's prettier in daylight," Lena said. A small chuckle came through, edged with something that sounded like fondness. "Daylight's overrated. Night shows you what the road's really like. You hear every sound, feel every inch. You're driving by trust more than sight." She thought of that, of the trust between rubber and road, of the invisible agreements that kept everything moving. The solitude out here didn't feel unfriendly. It felt like a vast, patient thing, watching, waiting, willing to share its quiet if she moved through it gently. She glanced at the clock. 3:06 a.m. The numbers glowed faintly green. Time had been moving in small, irregular jumps since the fog came down, stretched thin and then bunched up like fabric under a hand. "Almost there," he said. "You'll see the merge coming back onto the main line. It sneaks up on you. Stay right and don't overcorrect." The road began to flatten. The fog thinned in layers, like gauze being lifted one sheet at a time. Static edged the voice now, creeping along its syllables. "Appreciate the lead," Lena said, her gaze sweeping the emerging shapes ahead. The faint suggestion of bigger road signs loomed out of the gray. "Happy to run it with you," he replied. "Always good to have someone on the line. Nights get long up here." She found the merge exactly where he said it would be, a looping, almost awkward bit of pavement reconnecting with the main highway. The rockslide lay farther up the mountain now, out of sight, the danger itself more rumor than reality. She slid back onto the wider lanes, her tires singing a slightly brighter note on the newer asphalt. The fog, as if satisfied, began to unravel behind her. In the mirrors, it trailed like breath turned visible, then faded into the darker slopes. Stars pricked into being overhead, sharp and white, and the ribbon of highway ahead took on that quiet, infinite quality of the late-night road. Lena reached for the mic again. "You still up there?" she asked. Only static answered, soft and unhurried. She tried once more, giving her handle, describing her rig out of habit. A faint sound brushed back in reply, like wind through pine, or the distant rumble of another truck far up the grade, but no voice. She drove on. A rest area came just before dawn, its lights a gentle gold against the paling sky. While fuel pumped and the morning air nipped at her nose, she mentioned the rockslide and the detour to the attendant inside, a middle-aged man in a polo with the station's logo stitched over the heart. He frowned thoughtfully. "Main road's all clear," he said. "Dot hasn't had a closure up there in, 2 years now? Not for a slide anyway. You sure you weren't on a construction detour?" "Sign said rockslide," Lena replied. "Old Summit Road." "Old Summit." He turned to the map tacked up behind the counter, tracing with his finger. "That one's been closed down official-like since last winter, washed out in 3 places. They only let the crews up there, and that's daytime." He gave her a half-apologetic smile, like someone indulging a traveler's mixed-up directions. "Fog plays tricks, gets in your head. I've had folks swear they took roads that don't even exist anymore when it's thick like this. Back in the cab, with the sun finally lifting over the mountain shoulders, Lena checked her GPS log. The line of her route arced neatly along the main highway, no recorded deviation, no little kink where a detour might be. The miles matched. The schedule matched. On paper, she'd gone straight through. Fatigue, she told herself as she pulled back onto the widening road. Just the long night and the dense sky, and the mind filling in shadows with company. The CB had been known to catch stray signals from halfway across the state on the right night. Voices got dislodged that way, old conversations rolling around in the air. Yet each time fog pooled on a climb after that, turning the world into a soft, glowing tunnel, she found herself listening. Sometimes, when the white pressed thick against the glass and the stars were nothing but imagined pinpricks beyond it, a crackle would come. A low, familiar rasp might murmur something about the grade ahead, about curves that tightened, about weather that turned without warning. Always the advice was sound. Always the road bent where the voice said it would. On those nights, with the world reduced to a narrow beam and the steady heartbeat of the engine, the loneliness of the highway felt different. Not diminished, exactly, but shared. As if somewhere ahead, or just out of sight, another rig was climbing the same invisible hill, its lights swallowed by the same old, waiting fog. Story number 3. The wetlands began where the farmland ended, though from the highway it was hard to tell exactly where that line lay. At night, the difference was mostly in the way the air felt. A little heavier, a little cooler, carrying the faint, clean scent of standing water and reeds. The land on either side of the two-lane lay almost perfectly flat, stretching away into darkness broken only by the occasional, skeletal silhouette of a bare tree. Miles drove into it like a ship into a gray sea. His rig's headlights washed over the slick pavement, revealing a scant stretch of road before everything dissolved back into murk. The dash clock read 3:19. The world inside the cab was a small, humming refuge, instrument lights glowing soft amber, a thermos within reach, the low, contented drone of the engine filling the space like a steady heartbeat. The fog had come down an hour earlier, first in shallow wisps, then in thicker fingers that crept up from the ditches and pooled over the asphalt. Now it lay in a solid sheet, pressed down from above as if someone had laid a wool blanket along the length of the highway. The horizon was gone. The sky, too. Sound felt padded. Even the wiper's slow, rhythmic squeak seemed muffled. Miles sipped lukewarm coffee and watched the broken white line appear and vanish at the edge of his lights. The solitude out here didn't bother him. If anything, he found a kind of strange peace in it. No billboards, no sodium vapor glow of distant towns, just the closed-in world of his cab and the narrow strip of road that kept unfolding, always at the same patient pace. He almost missed the first flash of movement on the shoulder. It was just a quick flare of brightness at the far fringe of his vision, like a flashlight being swung once and then held still. Reflex brought his eyes to the right-hand mirror, but all he saw was fog slipping past and the faint suggestion of guardrail posts. Then, as he rounded a gradual bend, the shape resolved. A small car parked on the shoulder, its hazard lights dead, its hood raised. Beside it stood a figure, a person wrapped in a dark jacket, arm lifted, the pale oval of a face barely visible. In that brief, cocooned pool of visibility between 1 second and the next, Miles saw the weak glow of a flashlight in the person's hand, pointed down toward the asphalt rather than at the truck. He eased off the accelerator, instinct tugging at him. The shoulder here was narrow, the ditch beyond the guardrail deep and black with water. Stopping a loaded rig on a fog-slicked two-lane was a decision with weight. The responsibility settled on his shoulders like an extra jacket. The figure did not step into the lane or wave frantically. They only stood there, arm half raised, watching the truck approach through the fog. Miles brought his hand to the CB mic out of habit, thumb brushing the talk button, even as he drifted his foot back to the throttle to maintain speed. By the time he made his decision, to go up ahead, find a safer spot to turn around, maybe pick up a call on the radio. The car and its silent watcher were already slipping past his window. He only caught a last impression. The car looked older, its paint a dull, nondescript color, its shape low and rounded. The person's hair was short, their features blurred by distance and the wet, glowing air. In the mirror, they were gone almost immediately, subsumed by the fog as if nothing had ever broken the smooth, pale wall of it. He thumbed the CB. 14 northbound. Anyone else catch that breakdown on the shoulder back there? He asked, nomming the mile marker he'd passed a moment earlier. Static answered, soft and slow, with brief, far-off edges of voices he couldn't quite pull into clarity. No one close, no one definite. He let the road take him another mile, then another, eyes scanning for some wider patch of shoulder or pull-off, some place where 50-odd feet of truck and trailer wouldn't block half a lane. The fog seemed to grow thicker instead of thinner, compressing the world to an even smaller circle of light. 3 miles later, the second car appeared. Same side of the road, same dim, waiting shape on the shoulder. This time Miles saw it farther out, a darker blur coalescing into hard lines as he drew closer. Hood up. Cabin angled slightly away from the lane, a solitary figure beside it, holding a faintly glowing flashlight that pointed at the ground. The person's stance was eerily similar, arm at half-mast, face turned toward the oncoming truck. He felt the small hairs along his arm stir. He checked the odometer. He checked the mile marker as it slipped by on his left, 214. The last one had been 211. The logical part of his brain offered explanations. 2 different cars. Coincidence. People misjudging the conditions, slipping off the shoulder into shallow ruts. The wetlands were notorious for patchy cell coverage. Folks got stuck out here sometimes. But the image of the first car's rounded shape, the slant of the raised hood, the tilt of the waiting figure's head, they lined up too smoothly with what he was seeing now. If he had been asked to sketch both scenes from memory, they would have matched almost perfectly. He slowed more this time, hazard lights ticking a steady orange rhythm. The figure did not wave, did not step closer or farther, just watched, flashlight down, arm half raised. He mouthed a quiet apology that no one could hear and rolled past, tension in his shoulders like a knot. 214 northbound, he said into the CB. Got another vehicle on the shoulder, possible breakdown. Anybody able to stop? I'm hauling heavy, can't take the risk in this fog. It was part confession, part plea. The answer came after a few seconds, a soft voice almost too quiet to register. 214, it repeated, underlaid with a whisper of crackle. Yeah, I see them. The voice drifted off again, as if the speaker had turned away from the mic mid-sentence. Miles waited for more, for someone to give a handle or a company name, some sign that this was another driver on the same ribbon of road. There was nothing, just the gentle hiss of distant air. The fog pressed in closer still, until it felt less like weather and more like a presence. Its edges glowed in the headlight beams, pearl soft and impenetrable. The world beyond the hood of the truck didn't exist. Only this moment, this distance, this sound. At mile 217, there was a wide turnout cut into the right-hand side, one of those gravel pads carved for utility vehicles and the occasional impatient commuter. Miles slowed to a cautious stop, hazard still pulsing. The engine's idle filled the quiet, an anchor in the formless dark. He sat for a moment, hands resting loosely on the wheel, listening. The fog brushed faintly at the side mirrors. Water ticked from the undercarriage. Somewhere out in the wetlands, a lone frog croaked once, then fell silent. His thumb found the CB again. Whoever answered me back at 214, he said, you still on? For a heartbeat there was nothing. Then, still on, the same soft voice replied, distant and unfocused. They're still there. Somebody stopped, he asked. You able to help him out? A pause. Static breath in the line. Stopped, the voice said. Been stopped a long time. The words rested on the air that way, Not quite wrong, not quite right. Miles felt the faintest ripple of chill along his spine, more thought than temperature. He made his choice then, partly out of stubbornness, partly out of the quiet obligation that came from too many nights on too many roads when he'd been the one grateful for another set of headlights. He eased the rig back into gear, pulled out, and made a slow, careful turn in the empty highway. The fog turned the maneuver into something that felt almost blind. No distant points of reference, no horizon, only the white lines arcing and then straightening beneath him. Heading south now, back toward 214, the road felt subtly different. The same, but not. The darkness seemed denser. The broken white lines passed under his wheels at a slower, more pronounced beat, like a song in a slightly different time signature. He watched the shoulder. Mile 216 slipped by, then 215. The fog did not thin. It did not thicken. It simply remained absolute, a neutral, enveloping presence. At 214, he saw the car again. It was parked in precisely the same spot he'd seen it in heading northbound, as if it had been waiting in that exact position all along, regardless of his direction of travel. Hood up, body low and rounded. A single figure by the front fender, flashlight in hand, its glow aimed down into nothing. He slowed to a crawl, hazard lights tapping orange onto the fog. Up close now, he could see more detail. The car's paint was a pale, neutral color, maybe silver, that had dulled with age. The license plate was unreadable in the glare. The person beside it wore a dark jacket zipped to the throat, jeans, shoes that were little more than shadow. Their hair hung to just below the ear, neither long nor short. Their face, what he could see of it in the low, diffused light, looked tired, not panicked. Eyes focused on the truck, not on the engine bay. He rolled down the passenger window a crack. Damp air slipped in, cool against his skin. "You all right there?" he called over the engine's idle, his voice oddly small in the vast, wet quiet. The figure's head tilted as if listening. The flashlight remained pointed down. They did not step closer, did not speak. Miles felt his gut tighten. "You need me to call someone," he tried again. This time the figure shifted. A small motion, like a weight being redistributed from one foot to the other. For the first time, the flashlight began to rise. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the beam lifted from the pavement toward the truck, as if drawn by invisible strings. He expected the harsh circle of yellow to hit his face, or the headlights, or to sweep aimlessly across the lane. Instead, the glow faltered halfway and then simply went out. No flicker, no sputter, just gone. In the instant after the light died, the fog seemed to surge forward, filling every vacant space. The figure, the car, the raised hood, all of it blurred and then vanished into soft, uniform gray. The shoulder became an indistinct smear. The world on that side of the road emptied as if a curtain had been pulled across it. Miles blinked hard, leaning forward, wipers squeaking once in protest. His heart had jumped, but it settled quickly, more bewildered than afraid. He flicked the high beams on, sweeping the shoulder. Nothing. No car. No figure. Only the gentle gradient of fog and the faint suggestion of reeds beyond the guardrail. He rolled the window up and sat, listening to the engine. His own breathing sounded too loud. He checked the mirrors, the gauges, the road behind him. Everything was in its place. Everything was normal, except it was. The CB crackled. 214, the soft voice said again, almost thoughtful now. "You saw him, didn't you?" Miles swallowed, his mouth dry. "I saw something," he said. "Car gone now, fog's playing tricks." "Fog remembers," the voice replied. "Holds things, lets 'em slip out sometimes." He wanted to ask who he was talking to, where they were, how their signal was coming through so clear in all this emptiness. Instead, what came out was, "Anyone actually need help out here?" A pause. In that space, he listened to the faint roar of his own engine, to the damp whisper of fog along the outside of the cab. When the answer came, it was kinder than he expected. "Not tonight," the voice said. Not anymore, you did what you could. The channel fell quiet. The air in the cab felt a shade warmer, as if some tautness had loosened. He turned the rig north again, easing back into the slow, steady march of miles. The fog remained for another hour, then gradually began to thin, turning translucent, then sheer, then finally dissolving into ragged wisps that clung only to the lowest points of the landscape. Dawn crept in along the horizon, painting the sky in diluted gray-blue. At the next truck stop, under a sky that had forgotten the night's strangeness, Miles stepped out into the weak morning light. The attendant, an older woman with sharp eyes and a soft voice, chatted idly as she rang him up. He asked, casually as he could, about breakdowns on that stretch, about people getting stuck in fog, about ghost calls on the CB. She nodded slowly as he talked, her gaze drifting past him to the parking lot outside, to where the highway lay in the distance like a quiet, waiting line. They used to have a lot of trouble down by the wetlands, she said. Before they widened the road, bad visibility, no shoulders. Folks would slide off into the muck, and it'd take hours before anyone even knew they were there. Used to? Miles asked. Ma'am? She tapped a finger against the counter in thought. There was one bad pileup years back in fog like you wouldn't believe. Couple cars, maybe a pickup. Engine fire, they say, but it didn't spread far, no gore, nothing like that, just stillness after. They redid the whole stretch after that, straightened it, put in more lights. Haven't had anything on that scale since. She glanced at him then, really looked at him. You see something out there. He considered the question. The car with the raised hood. The patient, silent figure. The flashlight that went out as if someone had cupped a hand over the beam. The voice on the CB talking about things being stopped a long time. Fog, he said at last, thick enough to make you see double. She smiled, understanding more than he'd said. Fog's funny like that, she murmured. Shows you pieces, makes you feel not quite alone even when you are. Back on the road, with daylight soft but certain around him, the wetlands looked ordinary again, wide and flat and gently rippled by wind. The highway sign stood clear and clean. The mile marker at 214 flashed by, its numbers bright and perfectly unremarkable. Yet every time the weather cooled and the fog rolled in on some other stretch of lonely road, Miles found himself watching the shoulder with a different kind of attention. Sometimes, deep in the white, he thought he saw the hint of a raised hood, the curve of an older car, the patient figure with the flashlight pointed at their own feet. And on very quiet nights, when the CB cracked open with a soft, half-familiar voice saying a mile number in that thoughtful way, the solitude of the cab felt companioned, just enough to turn the chill that ran along his skin into something almost comfortable. A reminder that roads remember. That sometimes in the thickest fog, the past leans close, not to frighten, but simply to be noticed for a moment by someone passing through. Story number 4. By the time Danny reached the plateau, the night had settled into its quietest hour. Out here, the land unfolded in long, gentle waves. Fields turned to stubble, low hills smoothed by distance, clusters of bare trees leaning together like people sharing secrets. The highway cut through it all in a straight, dark seam, 2 lanes northbound, 2 southbound, with a wide median of winter-yellow grass between. Inside the cab, the world was narrowed to the soft, humming rectangle of her dashboard and the pale swath of light spilling from her headlights. The clock on the dash read 2:23 a.m. A faint drizzle had started an hour ago, just enough to sheen the asphalt and miss the windshield. Now, somewhere between one small town and the next, the drizzle had thickened into that fine floating moisture that hovered close to the ground, a low, creeping fog that clung to the land and refused to lift. It hugged the highway in a thin, luminous band, knee-high in some places, shoulder-high in others. Trees rose out of it like ink drawings. Road signs grew out of it, their reflective faces flaring briefly in the beams before turning back to shadow. The sky overhead was a blank, low lid of cloud, trapping the glow from her lights and pulling it inward. Danny adjusted her grip on the wheel, more out of habit than necessity. The rig purred along, steady and sure. The trailer behind her was loaded but not heavy, a temperate weight that made the truck feel well grounded on the slick, dark road. The first sign of the construction zone appeared as a dull, orange flicker ahead, a blinking aero board half swallowed by fog, its lights hazy and soft. As she drew closer, the shape of it resolved. A squat, wheeled trailer with a panel of amber arrows, the whole thing haloed by damp air. Left lane closed, the board instructed, arrow winking insistently. Danny flicked on her turn signal, slid smoothly into the right-hand lane. Her speed dropped a few miles an hour. Just ahead, a line of bright orange barrels emerged from the mist, guiding her into a gentle, narrowing curve. Beyond them, an unbroken procession of reflective cones marched off into the fog, their thin bands of white and orange glowing faintly. She'd heard about this stretch. They were widening it, someone had said, or resurfacing, or fixing something that had gone wrong under the asphalt. Out here, one construction zone blurred into the next. Orange signs and concrete barriers had become background features of the highway's face. The CB had been mostly quiet for the last 30 miles. Somewhere behind her, a pair of trucks had chatted briefly about fuel prices and football scores, their voices drifting in and out of range. Now there was only a soft blanket of static, like distant rain on a roof. Northbound, you got lane closures up ahead. Someone had asked an hour ago, their words faint. Copy that, another had replied. Couple miles of it, just follow the cones. They'll get you where you're going. The cones did their job faithfully. They rose one by one out of the fog, reflecting her lights, forming a corridor that funneled her into the left lane, then back toward the center, then around a gentle, sweeping curve outlined by concrete barriers. Behind them, the construction site itself was mostly suggestion, hulking shapes of machinery under tarps, the pale shimmer of plastic sheeting, metal scaffolds that seemed to arise from the fog and then sink back into it. Her speedometer hovered at 45. The rain fog pattered softly on the windshield. The wipers thumped in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Somewhere beneath that, the steady song of tires on wet pavement underlined it all. Up ahead, another sign appeared on the right, half concealed by moisture. Speed limit 45, double fines in work zone. A second sign followed almost immediately. Workers present, use caution. Danny scanned the shoulders out of instinct. All she saw were empty barricades, unattended machines, and pale rectangles of temporary lighting left on with no one beneath them. The lights themselves looked tired, pools of yellow that barely pushed back the gray. She passed an excavator parked just beyond the barrier, its arm frozen mid-arc. The cab windows were dark. Droplets of water glittered along its metal frame, running in thin lines that traced its shape. A stack of unused rebar lay beside it, each rod slick and black, ends banded with color. Another quarter mile, another set of lights. This time she thought she saw movement, a figure in a reflective vest standing near the edge of the barrier, shoulders hunched against the damp. The vest's stripes flashed as her headlights washed over it. For a heartbeat, the shape was clear. A person in a hard hat, head tilted down as if reading something in their hand. Then the fog thickened just a fraction, and the figure was gone. The vest might have been nothing more than a folded tarp thrown over a barricade. She let it go. Night played tricks, especially in weather like this. Shapes connected themselves in her mind before her eyes could confirm or deny. The road narrowed again. The barriers came in close on both sides, high and pale, beads of water sliding down their faces. The fog here felt denser, held lower by the walls. Her headlights ricocheted off damp concrete, scattering light in flat, hazy plains. It was like driving through the smooth, dim corridor of a half-finished tunnel. On the radio, an old song found its way through the static, just a few measures of something familiar, a guitar lick and a snatch of lyrics, and then slipped away. In its place, she heard what sounded like muffled clanks, the distant metallic echo of something dropped onto metal, the kind of sound she'd expect in a work zone alive with activity. But there were no people, no moving machines, just her rig laboring gently between patient, dripping walls. Another flashing arrow appeared, instructing her to merge right this time. Another sign, lane shift ahead. She followed the guided bend, trusting the cones and the painted temporary lines, even when they led her over seams and patches that felt unfamiliar under the tires. She glanced at the clock, 2:37 a.m. The construction zone continued. More barrels, more barriers. A crane this time, its boom reaching up into the low clouds, disappearing into the white. Portable light towers hummed faintly, their generators hidden somewhere in the mist. Their beams pointed down at nothing in particular, patches of bare, uncut earth, a line of stacked concrete culverts, an empty trench lined with orange safety fencing that sagged gently under the weight of moisture. She checked her odometer. She'd been in the zone almost 10 miles now. "Lot of work going on out here," she murmured, mostly to the dash. Her voice sounded overly clear in the close air of the cab. As if in response, the CB crackled to life. 10-4 on that, a voice said, warm and easy, like someone who'd been leaning on that mic for hours. "Feels like it goes on forever some nights, don't it?" Danny's hand went to the mic more quickly than she expected. "Yeah," she answered. "How far you been in it?" "All the way through," the voice said. It had a faint, hollow echo to it, as if it were bouncing off unseen surfaces before reaching her ears. "You just stay in your lane. They'll route you back where you need to be." She glanced in the mirror instinctively, looking for another set of headlights. The fog behind her was empty, a soft, unbroken milky wash. "Didn't catch your position," she said. "You westbound or eastbound?" The laugh that came through was small, almost fond. "Call it westbound," the voice said. "Call it whenever, just keep rolling careful. They got folks out there even if you don't see 'em." She let the words sit. The work zone signs had said as much. She thought again of the reflective vest she'd half seen, the phantom worker who might have been tarp or shadow. The road curved slightly left, then right. On either side the features repeated. Barriers, the occasional hulking machine, stacks of material, sagging fencing. Everything felt at once specific and strangely interchangeable, like different scenes cut from the same cloth of gray. At the 3-mile mark in her mind, she'd expected an end road work sign. At 5 miles, she was certain it must be near. At 10, that certainty had melted into a vague, uneasy curiosity. "Any idea how much farther?" she asked the air, starting to feel like I'm on a loop. Static hissed for a beat. Then, "Yeah," the voice said softly. "That's how it feels at first." "At first," she repeated before she could stop herself. Silence. The wipers swept once, twice. The road unfurled. The fog stayed exactly as thick, exactly as present. Her eyes found the clock again. 2:37 a.m. The minute hadn't turned. She watched it for a full, deliberate 60 seconds, the measured count in her head grounding her like the weight of the wheel in her hands. The numbers did not change. Outside, the construction zone held steady. Same barrels, same slick, shining barriers. A portable signboard rolled past on the right, its black screen empty of messages. "Time's funny in these stretches," the voice said quietly, as if he'd been watching her thoughts. "You get so wrapped up in what's right in front of you. It's like the rest of it don't know what to do." She swallowed, tasted coffee and cool air. "You dot?" she asked, half joking, half not. He chuckled again. "Not exactly," he said. "Just been running this pattern a long time. You'll come out the other side, they all do." A pause. "Most of 'em." The last words might have been static. They frayed at the edges. The highway narrowed once more, then opened slightly, then narrowed again, like a lung taking shallow breaths. Each shift felt familiar, as though she'd driven this exact configuration before. A broken barrier with a spiderweb crack near its base. A cluster of 3 cones closer together than the rest. A handwritten sign taped to a sawhorse, its ink run by rain into illegible streaks. She began to notice details repeating. Here, the crane with its boom swallowed by cloud. There, the excavator with the droplets sliding down its rust-speckled arm. Here, the unused culverts in their neat, damp row. Her fingertips tingled on the wheel. "How long you been out here?" she asked, quieter now. "Since they shut it down," the voice replied. His tone was calm, almost conversational, as though they sat together in some late-night diner booth watching the trucks go by. Had the whole crew working double. Night pours. Rushed it, if you ask me. Weather turned on 'em. Fog rolled in like it owned the place. She pictured it. High-vis vests and hard hats in the damp, portable lamps cutting swaths of white out of the darkness, machinery beeping as it backed and turned. The fog moving in, quietly, without fuss, until it lay over everything like a second skin. "They had a closure like this?" she asked. "Whole stretch down?" "Oh yeah," he said. "Locked it up tight. Nobody through. Few of us stayed on site when the others left, watching the pour, watching the clock, thought we were just waiting out the weather." Something shifted outside the cab, a subtle change in the quality of light. The fog brightened a little, then dulled again, as if some distant source of illumination had tried and failed to burn through. For a moment, she smelled something sharper under the damp air. Heated metal, maybe, or the faint tang of fresh asphalt. The barriers on her right ended abruptly, replaced by an open span of shoulder slick with moisture. A sign rose out of the gray. "End road work," its black letters clear and dry against the reflective white. Beyond it, the highway stretched ordinary and unremarkable. 4 full lanes of dark, wet pavement disappearing into a thinning veil of fog. Danny blinked hard, as if her eyes had skipped a frame. One heartbeat she was between concrete walls, the world compressed to a narrow, controlled chute. The next, she was free again, the sky a little higher overhead, the land spreading out on either side. She checked the clock, 2:51 a.m. Her chest loosened. She let the rig ease back up to cruising speed, the engine's notes smoothing into its familiar, easy thrum. In the mirrors, the construction zone was already fading, reduced to a smudge of reflected amber far behind. "See," the voice said softly, "told you you'd come out the other side." She exhaled through her teeth in a quiet, rueful laugh. "Could have fooled me for a while there." "That's how it gets," he said. "You keep your head, you keep your lane, you get through, just don't linger." The phrasing sat oddly in her ear. "You still back in it?" she asked. "Or you clear too?" Static crackled, rose, fell. For a moment she thought she heard other sounds in it, a distant clank, a shouted word caught and muffled by fog. "Still got some work to finish," he replied at last. "They're gonna get this stretch right one way or another. You watch yourself now. Next few miles roll nice and easy. Fog'll lift by the river." She wanted to ask his handle. She wanted to ask his company, his truck color, something to tie the disembodied voice to a plate of steel and rubber somewhere on this same black ribbon. Her hand moved toward the mic. The CB went quiet, utterly so, not even static. The little red light on its face glowed, but the speaker gave her nothing. She listened to that silence for a long minute, the faint hiss of her own breathing suddenly very loud. Then she turned the volume knob down a notch and focused on the road ahead. 20 miles later, at a fuel stop near the river, she asked the clerk how long the construction had been going on up on the plateau. He raised his eyebrows. "Construction," he repeated. "They finished that work 2 years ago, opened all 4 lanes, haven't had cones up there since." She described what she'd seen as vaguely as she could. Barriers, machines, long, empty corridors. He frowned, scratching the side of his jaw. "Used to be a mess," he said. "Whole stretch closed down one night when a fog bank rolled in and visibility went to nothing. Heard tell there was an accident with one of the crews. Nothing grisly, just equipment in the wrong place at the wrong time. After that, they redid the whole zone, ran it perfect. No night work allowed anymore. Too many complaints. Too many stories. His words trailed off as he watched her expression. Back in the cab, with the river fog lying low and soft and harmless over the water beside the highway, Danny turned the CB volume back up. The speaker gave her only the gentle murmur of distant chatter, other drivers far ahead or behind, talking about loads and weather and home. But sometimes, weeks later and miles away, passing through another work zone at some long, lonely hour, she'd catch the briefest echo of that same warm, hollow voice. A comment about lane shifts before she saw the sign. A quiet observation about how fog clung to fresh pavement. And when the orange barrels rose out of the mist in endless, patient rows, when the barriers closed in and the world shrank to a damp, echoing corridor, she felt less alone. As if someone else had been circling that same unfinished stretch for a very long time, guiding whoever happened to drop into it back out to the open road. Story number 5. The bay had its own weather, and it rarely cared what the land was doing. On the flat country roads miles inland, the night might be clear and sharp, stars scattered like salt. But out over the water, where the river widened and finally merged with the open gulf, the air grew heavier, stranger. Things gathered there, fog, wind, the distant echo of horns, like stories that couldn't quite make it back to shore. Cole's rig rolled toward the causeway just after 3 in the morning. The last town was already a soft glow in his mirrors, its lights swallowed inch by the dark. Ahead, the highway rose in a long, shallow ramp to meet the bridge that arched over the water. Beyond the ramp there was nothing visible yet, just a suggestion of greater darkness where the bay began and the sky ended. Inside the cab, everything felt enclosed and familiar. The dashboard glowed a muted blue-green, gauges steady, numbers calmly reporting the state of things. The quiet hum of the reefer unit behind him was a constant, like a second heartbeat. His thermos sat in its holder, half full, the coffee now more comforting for its warmth than its caffeine. He glanced at the dash clock. 3:07 a.m. This stretch of coastal highway had always felt a little unmoored from time. Towns were spaced out, miles of marsh and water between them, the road a narrow ribbon tying one sleeping cluster of lights to the next. Tonight, the air outside had the soft, expectant feel that came right before fog. The first sign warned of crosswinds. The second announced the bridge, bay span 7 miles. Between them, a smaller, older sign stood slightly crooked. Old eastbound bridge closed, do not enter. Cole knew that one. The original bridge had been decommissioned years back, shoved into early retirement after an inspection found too many things they didn't like. A newer, wider span had been built alongside it. Now, in daylight, you could see the two running parallel, the old bridge lower and narrower, its concrete grayed and salt-stained, its railings patched. At night, with clear skies, its dark skeleton rose just off to the side of the highway, a reminder of how thin the line was between still in use and better not. As the ramp lifted him above the last scraps of land, the first curls of fog slid over the hood. They were low and delicate at first, like wisps of slowly drifting breath. Then more came, sweeping in from the black expanse of water on both sides, drawn toward the warmth of the road, the lights, the passing steel and rubber. Cole eased his speed down a notch. The beam of his headlights shortened. Moisture purled on the side mirrors. The world beyond the glass softened and narrowed, shrinking to the gleam of the white lane lines and the pale glow of reflective markers along the barrier. Out over the open bay, the fog thickened. It didn't descend all at once. It built in layers, each one slightly denser than the last, until the water below and the sky above were both hidden behind softly glowing white. The bridge seemed to float in nothing. The only hint of its structure was the solid feel of concrete under the tires and the low, muted thrum of expansion joints passing beneath the wheels. Off to his left, something flickered. Cole's eyes went there automatically, a trained reflex honed by long miles and longer nights. Through the fog, just beyond the safety barrier, Two red lights glowed in a vertical line and slipped forward at a steady pace. Tail lights. He blinked. On that side there was supposed to be nothing but the old bridge, closed, locked at both ends with heavy gates and concrete barricades. No traffic, no lights, just steel and silence. But there they were, a pair of dim red points, hanging in the fog at what looked like the right distance and height for another truck's trailer doors. They moved when he moved, always a little ahead of him, sometimes vanishing for a moment in thicker patches and then reappearing. His fingers tightened on the wheel. He knew the tricks fog played with light. Reflections, refractions, the way brightness could ricochet off droplets and seem to float in midair. Maybe it was his own tail lights doubling back at some odd angle, bouncing off a sign or a section of wet railing. He checked the mirrors. Behind him, his own red lights glowed clear and separate. The space to his left showed only white. When he looked back out through the windshield, the twin red eyes on the old bridge were still there, packing him. The CB, which had been a low wash of static and very distant voices, popped and cleared for a heartbeat. "Northbound on the bay, how's that fog treatin' you tonight?" a voice asked. A man's, low and unhurried. The syllables stretched slightly as if they came from deep in his chest. Cole's hand found the mic. "Thick as pea soup," he answered. "Down to just about my nose. You out here too?" "Out here," the voice said. "Headed your way. Just keep your wheels between the lines. Fog can't bother you much if you stick to your lane." There was an old-fashioned lilt to his language. Phrasing Cole had heard more from older drivers, the ones who still tossed around half-forgotten CB slang like spare change. "You seeing much traffic?" Cole asked. "Looks like I got company on the old span." He kept his tone light, almost joking. The pause that followed had weight. "Yeah," the voice said finally, "you might say that." Outside, the fog pressed more closely to the glass. It wasn't harsh, exactly. It was soft, insistent, like a heavy curtain drawn around the cab. The sound of the world changed with it. The hum of the engine and the faint whistle of air past the mirrors were suddenly more intimate, as if the bridge were a tunnel. The red lights to his left brightened and then dimmed, as though the driver over there had lightly touched the brakes. As Cole watched, another pair of tail lights appeared behind the first, slightly lower, slightly closer together, the signature of a different rig, a different trailer, a convoy easing along in the fog. But on a bridge that was, officially, empty. He should have felt a spike of fear then, a jolt of alarm. Instead, what washed over him was a subtle, almost reluctant sense of companionship. Out here, in the cocooned world of fog and concrete, the idea that someone else was moving in parallel, even if they were not supposed to be, made the night feel less hollow. The bridge arched under him, invisible in the white. The overhead signs were little more than dark shapes with ghostly lettering. Low visibility, use caution, one advised. On the CB, another voice joined in, a second man, his tone younger, faintly amused. "Looks like we got a new one ridden the span," he said. "You keepin' him between the rails, Jack?" "Doing my best," the first voice Jack replied. "He's holding his own." Cole's grip tightened, loosened. "Appreciate the vote of confidence," he said. "Didn't catch your handles." "Call me Jack," the first voice said. "This here's Eddie. We've been running this bay a long while now. Fog nights are our specialty." Eddie chuckled. In the fog-wrapped cab, the sound felt strangely close. "You just follow that line, Cole," he said. "Don't stare too long off the side. She's pretty down there, but she'll make you think you're floating." Cole frowned at the mic. "I never said my name," he replied quietly. Static answered, gentle and persistent, like soft rain on tin. The red lights off his left flank held steady. He let the matter drop. The fog had a way of making the mind fill in gaps with familiar things. Handles, names, half-remembered phrases from other nights, it all blended together. They rolled on. A crosswind toyed at the side of the trailer, subtle but insistent. Below, though he couldn't see it, The black surface of the bay shifted and lapped, driven by currents and far-off tides. The bridge carried him forward, its expansion joints thumping under the wheels with a slow, comforting regularity. "What's it like out there?" a third voice asked, a woman's this time higher, threaded with a kind of gentle amusement. "Haven't had a good, thick fog in a while." "Thick enough," Jack answered. "Got us a driver stickin' pretty close to the script." The CB felt for a moment like a small, warm room, voices overlapping, muted chuckles, the easy cadence of people who knew each other well. Cole listened more than he spoke, letting their old-fashioned banter wash over him. They talked about mile markers in numbers that no longer matched the new signage, about truck stops Cole had never seen but had heard older drivers speak of in the past tense, about stretches of road that had long since been rerouted or widened. Off to his left, the phantom convoy grew. More red lights emerged, bobbing softly in the fog, each aligned with the hint of a dark shape beneath it. The gaps between them were even, the rhythm unhurried. They were not quite real enough to be distracting, not unreal enough to be dismissed. The bridge began its slow descent toward the far shore. Signs loomed out of the gray. Exit 12, BAYPORT 2 miles, wind advisory. The fog thickened one last time as if reluctant to let him go. In that densest patch, where the world outside shrank to nothing but the glowing strip of lane directly ahead, E.D.'s voice slipped through the speakers again, more serious now. "Hard right jog common up just past the next joint," he said. "Little sharper than she looks. Folks tend to drift." Cole's memory tugged. The newer span had a gentle curve near the far end, not much more than a suggestion, nothing tricky. But his foot eased fractionally off the accelerator anyway, his hands ready on the wheel. He felt it then, the bridge's subtle change in pitch, the faint tug of centrifugal force as the concrete beneath him bent just a hair more than he'd been expecting. Through the fog, a reflective arrow sign appeared, closer and sharper angled than he'd have liked, its chevrons flashing back his light. He corrected easily, the rig staying firmly in its lane. As the curve completed, he realized that if he'd taken it at full speed and just a touch more inboard, the drift might have been enough to brush the barrier. Nothing catastrophic, just a hard jolt, enough to leave a mark maybe. "Nice and easy," Jack murmured. "That's the way." The fog began to thin, slowly, reluctantly, as if pulling its hands away from his mirrors. The shapeless gray outside fragmented, revealing first a faint horizon line, then the soft ebony gleam of water below, then the blurred outline of shore. Sodium-lit exit ramps and rest area signs emerged from the murk like islands. The red tail lights on the old bridge dimmed as the distance between spans widened. One by one, they sank back into the white, until only the lead pair remained. For a few breaths longer, they ran parallel to his cab, keeping pace. Cole could almost imagine faces in those unseen trucks, glancing over, offering a nod before slipping back into their own lane of whatever passed for traffic over there. "Road yours from here," Jack said. "We'll take it from the next pass." Eddie's voice followed, light again. "Next fog night you stay between the lines. We'll keep an eye on you. That span's got a long memory." The CB quieted. The red lights vanished, not with drama, but simply by degrees, dim, dimmer, gone. When Cole looked out over the side, the old bridge was only a darker smudge against the paling fog, its railings crusted, its deck empty. He rolled onto dry land. The fog peeled back further, reduced now to tatters clinging to drainage ditches and low-lying patches of marsh grass. The sky ahead had lightened by a tone, leaning imperceptibly toward dawn. At the first truck stop beyond the bay, he topped off his tanks and walked stiff-legged into the store's warm brightness. The woman behind the counter was older, gray hair pinned back, her name tag partly obscured by a sweater. When he mentioned the fog on the bridge, she made a soft, sympathetic noise. "Bay gets like that," she said. "Whole span disappears. Folks say it plays tricks. My granddad worked that old bridge when it first opened. Told stories about convoys that vanish soon as they hit the thick of it. Nothing gory, just gone. Took 'em hours to find where they'd piled up against the rail. She shook her head once, fond and sad at the same time. They replaced it, of course. New spans safer. But some nights you still see lights out there where nothing ought to be. Old-timers say it's just the boys running their route, keeping people company. Back on the road, with clear air and the faint blush of sunrise touching the edge of the world, Cole flipped on the CB again. The usual chatter drifted in. Weather reports, jokes, dispatch calls. Every now and then, when mist hugged the pavement on some other lonely stretch, he'd catch a brief, familiar cadence. A calm voice mentioning a mile marker, a gentle warning about a sneaky curve. Never long, never more than a sentence or two. And when sea fog once again rose to meet him on some distant night, soft and insistent, folding the world into a narrowed tunnel of white, he found himself watching the far edge of his vision, half expecting to see a pair of dim red tail lights keeping him quiet, steady company across the emptiness. Story number 6. The desert at night was all contrast, cold air and residual heat, deep silence and the low, constant murmur of an engine moving through it. Mara's rig traced a narrow line of light across that darkness, headlights stretching out ahead, mirrors catching the occasional glint of distant reflector. The world beyond her windshield was a vast, flat wash of black, broken only by pale scrub, the ghostly silhouettes of cacti, and the suggestion of low mesas far off where the sky seemed to rest. The dash clock read 3:03 a.m. inside the cab. A gentle cocoon of warmth held back the chill. The soft buzz of the radio, turned down low, blended with the hum of tires on worn asphalt. Her thermos sat between the seats, its metal side cool where the coffee within had given up most of its heat hours ago. The road stretched ahead in an almost perfectly straight line, vanishing into a horizon she couldn't see. This stretch of highway had a reputation among drivers, though not a dramatic one. It wasn't known for steep grades, sudden storms, or treacherous curves. Instead, it was spoken of in quieter terms, a place where long miles blurred, where the mind wandered, where time seemed to loosen its grip just a little. A ribbon between small desert towns that slept behind their dark windows, porch lights like fallen stars scattered miles apart. Mara had done her planning. She knew that 40 miles ahead the land dipped into a shallow basin where cold night air pooled. Temperature inversions, they called it. Ground fog sometimes, even in the desert. She'd seen it once in daylight, a low, silvery haze clinging to the sand and scrub like a thin layer of smoke. At night it could be more, drivers said, thicker, stranger. The first sign of it was not visual, but something in the way the air looked around the twin cones of her headlights. Particles, moisture, caught and held the light just a little more stubbornly. The stars, sharp and indifferent above, remained clear, but near the ground a faint, milky veil began to form, hugging the asphalt and diffusing the reflective paint of the lane lines. She eased her speed down a few miles per hour out of habit. The steering wheel vibrated faintly under her hands, the road surface just rough enough to make itself known. The engine droned, content and untroubled. Up ahead, a green sign materialized out of the dim, hanging in the beam like something suspended in water. Rest area / way station, 2 miles. Its metal skin glittered with tiny points of reflected light. The sign looked older than most along this route, paint a little dull, edges a little softened. Mara frowned slightly. She didn't remember a way station out here. A rest area, maybe, a small one with a few concrete tables and scrubby trees. Her GPS map showed nothing at that exact point, just a long, uninterrupted bar of highway between exits. But computers missed things, and road work changed faster than databases. The thought of a place to park for 10 minutes to stretch and pour the last of her coffee had its own pull. The fog thickened as the land began to subtly slope downward. It gathered in the shallow dips, then rolled up, until it sat waist-high on either side of the lanes. In her headlights, it became a glowing floor, the desert beyond erased. The highway seemed to float on a white sea. Another sign appeared, lower and closer to the shoulder. Way station open, all trucks. An arrow pointed to a lane that peeled off gently to the right. Amber lights glowed ahead in a low cluster, hazy and inviting in the fog. Mara flipped on her right turn signal, the tick-tick-tick loud in the quiet cab. The rig followed her hands onto the ramp, the surface of the road changing under the tires, same asphalt, different rhythm. The fog pressed in more densely here, held in the shallow basin like breath in cupped hands. The way station emerged by slow degrees, its shape assembled from pieces of light and shadow. First, the faint lattice of a sign over the truck entrance, way/inspection in blocky letters, some of the bulbs in the frame dimmer than others. Then the low, rectangular building itself, its windows glowing soft yellow from within. A row of sodium vapor lamps cast a limited circle of orange over the concrete apron and the metal scale platform, their glow turning the fog into swirling, golden mist. There were no other trucks. The lot beyond the scale sat empty, outlined only by faintly reflective wheel stops and the ghostly line of a chain-link fence that ran off into the dark. The open sign above the lane, a simple neon word, open, in red, hummed faintly. Mara rolled the window down an inch. Cool, damp air slipped in, carrying the scent of wet concrete and dust. Somewhere nearby, an unseen generator ticked and coughed softly. She guided the truck onto the scale as the painted instructions demanded, aligning her wheels with the worn white lines. A low bump, then stillness. The engine idled, a steady purr. The fog curled lazily around the edges of the platform, eddies forming and dissolving. Inside the small building, a silhouette moved behind the glass, a figure crossing from one side to the other. A moment later, the intercom speaker on a pole beside her crackled to life, its metal grill speckled with rust. "Even in, driver," a man's voice said, filtered and faint but clear enough. It had a dry desert drawl, a hint of cigarettes and late hours in it. "Go ahead and set your brakes there." She did, the familiar hiss and clunk grounding her. "Evening," she replied, leaning slightly toward the open crack in the window. "Didn't realize this station was still open, not on my map." "Been here longer than those gadgets," the man answered, amusement threading through his words. "We're where we always been, just sometimes folks forget." A faint click sounded from somewhere under the truck, the scale waking up, numbers unseen moving into place. Mara watched the building. The figure behind the glass came into better focus. A man in a light-colored shirt, sleeves rolled, dark vest, something like a tie. Not a uniform she recognized from the current highway patrol or dot. He moved with unhurried familiarity, as if he'd walked that small room for decades. Outside, the fog pressed itself against the building's walls, brushing the windows with soft, shifting patterns. The amber lights flickered once, then steadied. "Where you headed?" the man asked. "You're late through." "West," Mara said. "Cutting across to the interstate. Got a drop in the morning." Paper rustled inside, or something that sounded like it. A soft clack, like the buttons of an old mechanical scale being tapped. "You run this road often?" "First time at this hour," she admitted. The fog beyond the scale thickened briefly, then parted just enough to hint at something else. The shadow of another truck on the far edge of the lot where she'd been sure there was nothing. It was only an outline, a darker darkness, low and boxy, parked at an angle. Its marker lights were dim, almost the same color as the fog around it. She blinked, looked harder. The shape seemed to unravel under her gaze, dispersing back into mist. The space where she'd seen it was empty once more. A soft ding sounded on the intercom pole, the sort of tone installed to get a driver's attention. "You're good on weight," the man said. "Running light, actually. You want your ticket." Habit ward with an odd reluctance. "Sure," she said. A moment later, the small tray at the base of the window slid outward with a squeal she could hear even from the truck. A square of paper lay there, pressed flat by an invisible hand. Through the glass, she saw the man's face more clearly for the first time. Lined, pale under the room's yellow light, eyes shadowed by the brim of a cap with a circular emblem she couldn't quite make out. She climbed down carefully, boots touching the concrete with a dull, damp sound. The fog swirled around her knees. The world felt very small, just the patch of light, the soft rectangle of the station building, the looming shape of her truck disappearing into swirling white. The air was colder here, closer to the ground. She crossed the few steps to the window, the tray between them. The man behind the glass watched her with a mild, tired interest. His tie was narrow, the fabric thin. A small oscillating fan on the counter behind him turned slowly, pushing the same air from one side of the room to the other. She picked up the paper. It was a way slip, printed in faint purple ink. The top carried the way station's name in block letters, a name that matched the sign on the overhead frame. The date field had been stamped, but the year made her pause. 1987. She looked up. The man's expression hadn't changed. If he saw the question in her face, he didn't acknowledge it. "Our clocks get funny out here," he said instead. "Fog does that, messes with the machines. Long as your weight's good, you're good." Mara folded the slip carefully, slid it into her jacket pocket. The paper felt dry and slightly brittle under her fingers, like something that had been sitting in a drawer for a very long time. "You get many through here at this hour?" she asked, keeping her tone light. "Enough," he said. "More before, different times, different kind of traffic." His gaze drifted past her shoulder, out toward the void where the rest of the lot should be. "Fog nights bring out the strays, folks between places. We make sure they're still solid." She turned reflexively, following his line of sight. For a heartbeat, the incoming lane to the scale seemed occupied. The pale, rounded nose of an older cab-over truck easing up through the mist, headlights dim compared to her own. Its silhouette wavered slightly, like something seen through heat shimmer. Then the fog thickened, eddied, dissolved the image. The lane was empty. Her own rig sat still and massive on the platform, the only real weight in the world. The intercom crackled once more. "Go on now," the man said kindly, as if to a weary relative. "Road, waiting. Fog'll lift a bit past the basin. Don't stop again till you're on higher ground." She thought of asking his name. Thought of asking how a station not marked on any updated map had live lights, humming neon, a working scale. Instead, she just nodded. The gesture felt oddly formal. Back in the cab, the warmth wrapped around her again. She released the brakes, felt the small forward nudge as the rig obeyed. The scale platform thumped softly under her as she rolled off, the numbers beneath her translating from data back into stillness. As she pulled past the building, she glanced sideways one last time. The man stood at the window, one hand braced on the counter, watching her with an expression that was neither welcoming nor sad. Just steady. Behind him, the room looked oddly spare, as if parts of it had been taken away. A bare patch on the wall where something might once have hung, shelves with more empty space than papers. In the fog-dimmed mirror, the way station receded. The amber lights became floating orbs, then smears, then vanished entirely as she rejoined the main highway. The open sign's red glow was the last to go, hanging alone in the white for a long second before the road bent and took it from view. The ground fog lay thicker in the basin, curling up and over the hood, whiting out the desert on both sides. The lane lines glowed, bright and reassuring. Mara drove by them and by the feel of the road under her hands, trusting the familiar equilibrium of metal, rubber, and momentum. She glanced once at the clock. 3:07 a.m. It had not moved. Her breathing stayed slow and even. She checked her wristwatch. Its hands agreed with the dash. Either they'd both paused, or she had imagined more waiting than she'd actually done. "Fog does that," the man had said. 10 miles later, the land began to rise again, almost imperceptibly. The fog thinned, then shredded, then was gone, left behind in the shallow bowl of the basin. The desert returned in its stark, open simplicity, dark mesas, pale stars, the low suggestion of distant lights where another town slept. At the next fuel stop, she asked the clerk, a young woman with a shaved head and a nose ring, if the way station down in the basin was still manned. The clerk looked up from her magazine, frowning. "There's no active station on that stretch," she said. "They closed the old one before I was born, torn most of it down. Just the concrete pad and some busted fence left. Guys go down there to shoot bottles sometimes. You see lights." Mara thought of the humming open sign, the warm rectangle of windows, the way fog had lapped at the station walls like a tide, the way the man inside had spoken as if he'd watched countless rigs roll onto his scale in the small hours. "Must have been a mirage," she said, "foggy as soup." In the cab, she unfolded the way slip again. The purple ink was faint but legible, her truck's weight, axle by axle, neatly typed. The date, stubbornly 2 decades past. At the bottom, in a looping script, a signature. The name meant nothing to her. The shape of the letters did, written, not printed, from a hand that had pressed a pen to paper with routine care. She turned it over. On the back, in that same hand, someone had scribbled 4 numbers, the very mile marker where the fog had begun to thicken. She kept the slip, not as evidence because she doubted anyone would take it as such, but as a quiet, folded reminder in the logbook pocket of her jacket. A small weight, no heavier than a memory. In the months that followed, whenever dense fog pooled on some lonely stretch of highway, whether in desert basins, river valleys, or low forested hollows, Mara found herself watching for smaller, older signs. A faded arrow, a patch of pavement that felt subtly different under her wheels, the glow of unexpected windows where no building should be. And often, in those moments when the world shrank to a few truck lengths and the rest of existence became muted and soft, the dash clock would seem to hesitate. A minute would take longer than it should. Space would feel strangely folded. Those were the nights when the road felt most attentive, as if somewhere just off the lane, in some pocket of air where the past hadn't quite thinned out. Someone waited with a clipboard and a tired kindness, making sure that what rolled through the fog was, in fact, fully there. Story number 7. The beltway around the city was meant to be efficient, a wide, looping arc of light and asphalt, carrying traffic past dark neighborhoods and shuttered strip malls while the rest of the world slept. But at 2:40 in the morning, with the fog coming down in slow, deliberate sheets, it felt less like a modern shortcut and more like a long, patient circle that could have been laid down at any point in the last 50 years. Javier's rig eased along the outer lane, his headlights cutting 2 pale tunnels through the gray. The city itself was only a suggestion now, a smear of sodium glow far to his left. To the right, low industrial parks and empty fields alternated and then blurred into one continuous, anonymous dark. The sign overhead had flashed Beltway East, all trucks 10 minutes ago. Since then, the road had become its own small world. Inside the cab, the dash cast a gentle, familiar light. Gauges sat right where they should be. The air vents hummed softly. His travel mug, jammed into the cup holder, had just enough lukewarm coffee left to seem worth nursing. The CB muttered now and then with distant chatter, but nothing close, nothing clear. The fog had begun as a thin veil over the median, easily ignored. It thickened gradually, threading itself between streetlights, blurring the sharp edges of signs, turning reflective paint into soft glows. Before long, it was a low, even layer that swallowed everything from the concrete barrier down. The tops of the overhead lamps floated above it, their stems and poles eaten away, leaving only luminous orbs hanging in the air like a string of hesitant moons. He turned the radio dial more out of habit than hope, skipping past bursts of static and half-caught music. Local FM stations faded in and out, their playlists chopped into unrecognizable fragments by distance. Somewhere around the low end of the band, the static smoothed, and a clear voice slipped into the cab. "And for all you night drivers out there, keep those eyes open and that coffee warm," a man said, his tone rich and easy, carrying the practiced warmth of someone who'd been talking to strangers in the dark for a long time. "You're tuned to 1070 AM, the lantern, guiding you through the small hours." A soft guitar line followed his words, the opening of an old country ballad Javier's father used to hum around the house. It was clean, almost too clean, no hiss, no crackle. The sound hugged the small space of the cab, intimate in a way late-night radio rarely managed anymore. Javier glanced at the digital readout on the stereo. It listed the frequency, but no station name. Most of the AM band lay empty these days. Community talk here and there, the occasional sports recap. He hadn't expected to find an honest-to-goodness overnight DJ anywhere near the city. The song played all the way through, full and unbroken. The fog outside thickened further, climbing. Now to mid-door height on passing cars, turning their tires into vague, spinning shadows. The Beltway's lanes flowed on, wide and mostly empty, a few red taillights glimmering ahead and then vanishing. A green sign slipped out of the white beyond his beams. Exit 29, Eastport, 1 mile. Beneath it, a smaller, older sign clung to the same pole. Night Owl Truck Plaza, next exit, 24 HR Diner/Motel. The paint on that second sign looked a little duller, the reflective coating less eager to give back his light. He didn't remember a night owl on this loop. The big chains had colonized most of the exits long ago. Bright plastic logos, standardized layouts, the promise of familiarity. The idea of a smaller, older plaza tucked half-forgotten along the Beltway held its own appeal. Hot coffee poured by someone who called him Hun, the clink of ceramic instead of paper cups, maybe a shower without a line. On the radio, the DJ came back, his voice a low, companionable murmur. That was two-lane memory, going out to Jake rolling eastbound through the fog. "Jake, you watch those exit signs now. Hard to tell one from the next when the world shrinks down to the hood of your rig." Javier's hand tightened slightly on the wheel. The way the DJ phrased it, the way he spoke to drivers specifically as if he could see them, felt oddly focused. Up ahead, the fog brightened in a broad, hazy smear where the exit ramp split from the main flow. More lamps. A service area, maybe. The green overhead sign confirmed it. Exit 30, Eastport Truck Plaza/Fuel. There was no mention of the night owl on this one. Just generic promises of food, fuel, lodging. He checked his fuel gauge. Plenty left. Checked the clock. 2:43 a.m. He could push on to the next big truck stop easily. But the fog, coiled so thick around the road now, made the idea of stepping out into a sheltered pool of light, just for a little while, seem comforting. The radio crackled softly. "Eastbound, you got good company on the loop tonight," the DJ said. "Fog's rolling in like old times. Night owls open if you need to take the edge off that white-knuckle stare." Javier flicked on his turn signal, more because his fingers were halfway there than from any reasoned decision. The exit lane accepted him smoothly, the fog thickening as he left the open span of the Beltway for the slightly lower ground of the off-ramp. Trees loomed suddenly on either side, bare branches, making shadowy webs over the barrier. At the bottom of the ramp, a broad, empty access road stretched ahead, its shoulders swallowed by white. To the right, faintly through the fog, he saw glowing shapes, a low building, tall signs, the angular silhouettes of fuel canopies. No bright chain logos, just simple block lettering on a pole sign washed half unreadable by moisture. Night owl, he made out, the O flickering. The parking lot lay mostly empty. A couple of dark rectangles might have been trucks or might have been shadows. The area lights hummed, their halos shrinking the closer they got to them. He picked a lane near the edge, backed into a space by feel, relying more on mirrors and instinct than sight. The fog dulled every sound, turned the clunk and hiss of brakes into something shy. He cut the engine. For a moment the silence pressed in solidly. Then the subtle background noises emerged. The faint buzz of lights, the distant hum of refrigeration units, a soft, persistent whir like an old vent fan somewhere that no one had turned off in years. The radio still played, though, that same DJ's voice smoothing over the quiet. And if you found your way to the Owl tonight, grab yourself a cup and let those nerves settle. Road'll still be there when you're ready. The idea of shutting it off and stepping into a silence with no anchor made a small, resistant knot form at the base of his skull. He left the volume low, enough to hear if he left the door open. Outside, the air was cold and damp, carrying a faint, clean scent of asphalt and something fried, as if the smell had soaked into the place and never quite left. The fog wrapped around his legs, his waist, an invisible blanket that chilled without biting. His boots made muffled sounds on the pavement as he crossed toward the building. The night owl's exterior was a little worn. The sign above the door buzzed a tired neon blue, one-letter half-lit. The big front windows were fogged lightly from the inside. Through them he could see booths, a long counter, a pie case, a coffee pot on a burner. There was light, there was shape. There were no people. The bell above the door chimed when he went in, a thin, cheerful ring that seemed to belong more to an earlier decade. Warmth hugged him, soft and dry. The smells were as old-fashioned as the sign: coffee, grilled onions, something sweet with cinnamon. The booths were all empty. A jukebox glowed quietly in a corner, its lights a little too bright for its scratched plastic front. Behind the counter, a row of mugs hung neatly on hooks, each one slightly different. A single plate holding a slice of pie sat under a clear dome on the counter, untouched. "Sit wherever you like," a voice called, easy and pleasant. Javier turned. A woman in a pale uniform stood near the coffee pots, wiping her hands on a towel. Her hair was pulled back in a simple knot, a few strands loose around her face. There was a name tag over her heart, the letters faded from long hours. He couldn't quite read it. "Coffee?" she asked, already reaching for a mug. "Yeah," he said, sliding onto a stool halfway down the counter. "Please." The coffee steamed as she poured, dark and fragrant. The mug was heavy and solid in his hand, warm enough to be comforting without burning. "Fog's thick tonight," she said conversationally. "Loop gets quiet when it comes down like that. Feels like the whole city's holding its breath." He nodded. "Feels like I'm the only one out there." She gave him a small smile. "You're not," she said, "but it does feel that way sometimes, don't it?" From somewhere in the kitchen, a radio crackled. Another one, not his. The same warm DJ's voice drifted through the pass window, slightly tinny now. "All you drivers pulled in at the Owl, take 5, take 10, take your time. You've got miles behind and miles ahead. No need to rush the middle." Javier lifted his head. "You keep that station on all the time?" he asked. "Lantern 1070. Her eyes flickered to the side in a way that suggested she knew the station by heart. "Oh, yeah," she said softly. "Wouldn't feel right without it. He's been talking to drivers longer than I've been pouring coffee." He sipped. The coffee was strong, a little bitter, but in the best way. The second hand on the clock above the grill moved with a smooth, continuous motion, not ticking so much as gliding. He looked around more closely. The salt and pepper shakers were glass, their tops dulled from many wipe-downs. The laminated menus at each place setting showed photographs of food with slightly faded colors, the prices almost suspiciously low. There were no holiday decorations, no seasonal specials. The calendar on the wall near the back door displayed a month not quite matching the present one. "Been slow tonight?" he asked. "Slower every year," she said, not unkindly. "By the time they finish building new routes around places like this, folks forget we're here, but the ones who need us still find their way." He finished the coffee faster than he meant to. She refilled it without asking, the motion practiced, unhurried. The radio in the kitchen played another slow song, something smooth and old. Between tracks, the DJ mentioned accidents he remembered on this beltway back, when there wasn't a barrier nowhere, his voice dipping gently around the words so they landed without sting. Time seemed to soften at the edges. He checked his watch once, then twice. The hands had moved, but not as far as he expected. The clock on the wall disagreed with both, its face content in its own version of the hour. Eventually, he slid a couple of bills onto the counter, more than enough. "Thanks," he said, meaning more than the coffee. She nodded, scooping up the money with an economy of motion that spoke of years behind that counter. "You be careful on that loop," she said. "Fog likes to make the exits all look the same." Outside, the night met him like a patient thing. The fog had thinned a little near the building, the area lights pushing it back. His truck loomed out of it, familiar and solid. From the open door of the cab, he could hear his radio still murmuring. "Lanes are clear for those easing back onto the beltway. Watch for mile 32, slick spot near the merge." He climbed in, started the rig. The dashboard glowed, everything in its place. The clock flashed 2:45 a.m., barely later than when he'd pulled off. His body felt like more than 10 minutes had passed. Back on the access road, the night owl fell away behind him faster than it should have. The fog thickened again as he rejoined the beltway, swallowing the little service road whole. In the mirror, the sign and building vanished almost as soon as he turned his head. A mile later, another green sign floated out of the gray. "Exit 29, Eastport, 1 mile." Beneath it, on the same pole, the smaller sign for Night Owl Truck Plaza gleamed dully, its paint just as tired, its promise just as steady. He checked the odometer. The numbers insisted he'd traveled farther than a single mile. The DJ's voice rolled softly out of the speakers. "If you're just joining us," he said, "you're tuned to the lantern shining a little light on the loneliest miles. Night owls open for anyone who missed their turn. Don't worry. Out here, you always get another chance at the right exit." Weeks later, at a large, modern truck stop on the far side of the state, Javier mentioned the night owl to a clerk while paying for fuel. The man behind the counter looked up, surprised. "Night owl," he repeated. "Out by exit 30, that place burned down, what, late 80s, electrical fire, they said. Nobody hurt, but it gutted the building. They never rebuilt, just an empty lot now. Folks talk about it sometimes, say they still see the sign in the fog." "What about the radio station?" Javier asked carefully. "Lantern 1070. The clerk chuckled. "My granddad used to talk about that show. Phantom trucker, always on the air. Station went off years before I was even born. Tower came down in a storm. But you still get people calling in here asking what song is playing on that late-night station. Guess once you talk to enough lonely drivers, your voice sticks around a while." On clear nights after that, the beltways and bypasses were just roads. Concrete and light, signs and exits, towns sliding past in neat intervals. But when fog fell, thick and low and stubborn, Javier would thumb the AM dial down to 1070 and listen. Sometimes there was only static. Sometimes a modern station bled in, sports scores and talk. And sometimes, when the world narrowed and the white pressed close against the glass, a warm, familiar voice would emerge, speaking directly into the cocoon of his cab. "Eyes on the lines, driver. Exit, coming up if you need a place to rest. Some stops don't show on the map, but they're there all the same. You just have to be out here at the right lonely hour to see them." Story number 8. By the time Nate hit the high plains, the sky had turned from ink black to a flat, heavy charcoal, the stars blotted out by a low lid of cloud. The highway ran straight as a plumb line, carved through miles of open country where the land rolled in long, patient swells, and the wind never seemed to stop moving. His rig's headlights tunneled through the dark, twin cones of pale gold sweeping over faded lane lines and the occasional reflective post. On either side, the fields were an indistinct expanse, broken only by the faint ghosts of fence lines and the distant, skeletal suggestion of farm buildings hunkered against the horizon. Inside the cab, it was warm and familiar. The dashboard glowed in muted greens and ambers, gauges sitting peacefully where they should. The air vents hummed with a soft, steady breath of heat. His coffee had cooled to a comfortable lukewarm, more habit than necessity now. The clock on the dash read 2:58 a.m. Up ahead, the first of the red lights appeared, hanging in the distance like low, watchful stars. One blinked, then another, then a third. As the miles slid by beneath the tires, more joined them, marching into view until it seemed as if the horizon itself were pinned in place by a vast, pulsing constellation. Wind turbines. Even before he reached them, Nate could sense the change. The air outside the cab had a different texture here, the way it sometimes did near big structures you couldn't quite see yet, an invisible influence on the currents and eddies of the night. The endless wind of the plains brushed harder at the sides of the trailer, steady, insistent. A green sign rose out of the dark, reflective paint flaring in his headlights. Wind Farm Corridor, next 22 miles. High wind area, use caution. Below that in smaller letters another notice, scenic overlook 1 mile. He almost smiled at that. Scenic, at 3 in the morning under a ceiling of cloud. But he'd been through enough of these stretches to know how they looked in daylight. An army of white towers striding over the hills, blades turning slow and indifferent against impossible blue. Tonight, though, he had only the lights. And the fog. It began as a thin, silver haze clinging to the ditches, easily dismissed, a faint softening at the very bottom of his beams. Then it thickened, slicking over the blacktop in a low, luminous layer, as if the ground exhaled and the air forgot to take the breath away. The road dipped gently, barely enough to register, and the fog deepened with the slope. It gathered in the shallow basin of the land, pooled around the bases of the turbines now looming closer. Their towers rose out of it like columns of bone-white stone, disappearing again where blade met cloud. Nate eased off the throttle, watching the speedometer fall a few ticks. He flicked the wipers once, clearing a fine mist from the windshield. The fog had that paradoxical brightness that comes when it catches and returns your own headlights, both soft and glaring, turning the world ahead into a bounded, glowing bubble. The turbines' red warning lights pulsed above him in unison, an eerie, slow heartbeat in the sky. On, off, on, off. The rhythm seeped into the cab, into the edges of his thoughts. As he drew level with the first row of towers, he heard them, a low, rhythmic whoosh as the blades carved the dense air. It was deeper than he'd expected, more of a thrum than a swish, with a sub-bass note that he felt more in his chest and the soles of his feet than in his ears. Dozens of them, out there in the fog beyond sight, turning and turning, each adding its own pulse to the quiet mechanical choir. The CB had been a soft thread of static for the last hour. Now, as the fog thickened and the red lights blinked overhead, it crackled to sudden, brief life. "Eastbound in the corridor, you got your hands full tonight," a voice said, calm and low, words rounded by a slight drawl. "Fog's sitting down on those blades like it owns them." Nate reached for the mic without thinking. "Copy that," he said. "Visibility's getting close, you out here too?" "Always out here," the voice replied, not quite answering. There was a faint hum under his words, like wind over a wire or distant machinery. "Just mind the gusts off those towers. They like to surprise you between rows." In the driver's side mirror, a set of headlights materialized out of the murk. They were far enough back to be no immediate concern, but close enough that Nate could see them brighten, dim, and settle as the other driver adjusted for the conditions. The beam cut a second tunnel in the fog, the two lanes twinned in pale gold. It was reassuring, in a quiet way, not to be entirely alone in this strange, glowing corridor. He watched his mirrors as the miles ticked by. The headlights behind him stayed at the same patient distance, neither dropping back nor creeping up, holding the space between them as steady as the red lights overhead held their rhythm. "Scenic overlook, 1 2 mile," a sign whispered out of the white. The idea of stopping tugged at him, but habit kept him moving. Breaking fog driving concentration for anything less than necessary rarely felt right. He rolled on, following the invisible contours of the land as marked by the sway of the trailer and the gentle rise and fall of the road. The turbines closed in, their towers flanking him, fatting in and out of visibility. One moment they were stark and close, the next they dissolved into suggestion, then back into solidity. Each whoop of a passing blade seemed to hang in the air a second longer than it should. The CB crackled again. "Little jog left coming up just past the next mile marker," the same voice said. "Road pitches you toward the median a hair. Folks tend to drift with the wind." Nate's brows knit faintly. He knew this highway, or thought he did. On the map it was straight, but he trusted the instinct that told him this was worth listening to. He eased off the gas a fraction, hands firm but loose on the wheel. Sure enough, the subtle bend arrived, just enough of a curve to demand respect in low visibility. The fog, thickest over the median, made the center barrier vanish into glowing white. For a second, the world ahead became a featureless wall of light. The lane lines, faint and slick, felt like the only anchors he had. He held the turn, following the quiet nudge of momentum, the knowledge of the truck's size and weight. As the curve straightened, the barrier reappeared, then the faint suggestion of the opposite lanes. His breathing eased back to normal. "Nice and smooth," the voice approved softly. "You've got a feel for her." Nate glanced again at the mirror. The headlights behind him flickered, a brief swell of brightness, then a dip, as though the driver there had nodded too, even if no one could see it. He thumbed the mic. "Appreciate the heads up," he said. "Didn't catch your handle." Static murmured for a heartbeat before the answer came. "Most folks just call me Pilot," the voice said. "Run the corridor on nights like this. Make sure nobody forgets where the road wants 'em to go." Outside, the turbines continued their endless turning. The red lights above synchronized perfectly now, every beacon blinking in precise unison across the blotted-out hills. On, off. The fog caught each flash and held it, softening the harshness, turning the whole sky into a faintly breathing thing. The scenic overlook entrance glided past on his right. The low stone wall barely suggested in the fog, the outline of a small parking lot beyond it just a gray impression. For a moment, as he passed, he caught the shape of a truck parked there. An older cab, maybe, shorter and boxier than most on the road now. Its marker lights were dim, its silhouette blurred. Then the fog folded, and the shape unraveled into nothing. He drove on. The rhythm of the red lights and the quiet boom of the blades settled into the background of his thoughts, hypnotic but not unfriendly. Now and then, a gust of crosswind would push at the side of the trailer, a physical reminder that power was being drawn from this invisible air, transformed into something humming through wires miles away. "How long you been running this?" Nate asked, curiosity softening the question. "Long enough," Pilot said. "Longer than they've had all these towers up, even. Back when this was just another dark stretch, no blinking eyes watching you go by." Something in his tone carried the weight of many nights, many drivers. It reminded Nate of the oldest guys at the truck stop counters, the ones who'd seen a dozen different versions of the same road. "They put the farm in after that pileup," the voice went on, as if following thoughts Nate hadn't voiced. "Fog just like this. Less light, though, less warning. Convoy of 3 went through the basin and came out different. Took 'em a while to sort steel from stillness. Nobody hurt nobody else. Just the kind of quiet that settles and doesn't leave." The story hung there with no sharp edges, no grisly details. Just the suggestion of twisted metal, stopped motion, and the kind of silence that stayed with a place. "So now you keep an eye on it," Nate said. "Somebody ought to," Pilot replied. "These blades hum, but they don't talk. Road still needs a voice on nights like this." The corridor stretched on. Mile markers appeared and slipped away, their numbers less important than the steady feel of progress. The headlights in his mirror remained, a constant companion. At mile 22, the turbines began to fall away, their towers shrinking and then dropping behind low rises. The fog started to thin, not all at once, but in gradual, gauzy layers, first lifting from the road itself, then receding into the fields. The red lights overhead grew fewer, then vanished completely, leaving only the small, distant pinpricks of town lamps on the horizon. Nate checked the clock. 3:27 a.m. He wasn't entirely sure how long he'd been inside the corridor, long enough for his world to compress and then widen again. He glanced at the mirror. The following headlights were gone. No slow fade, no gradual increase of distance. One moment they were there. The next, the space behind him was empty, the fog thinning to reveal nothing but the sweep of his own taillights in the darkness. "Corridor's clear," Pilot's voice said, softer now, as if from farther away. "Rest of your miles'll be your own tonight." "Where you drop off?" Nate asked lightly. "Scenic overlook." A chuckle, dry and fond. "Something like that. I'll be around next time this stretch forgets it's a road and thinks it's a cloud. You just keep doing what you're doing. You drive like you're not alone." The CB settled back into a gentle hiss. Other voices came and went, someone talking about a way station up ahead, someone else grousing about dispatch, but none with that same low undercurrent of turbine hum, that same patient attention. At the next large truck stop, framed in corporate colors and bright canopy lights, Nate fueled up and went inside. The cashier was a middle-aged man with a badge that said Rick and a ball cap advertising a brand of oil. When Nate mentioned the fog in the wind farm corridor, Rick nodded slowly. "Yeah, that stretch gets thick," he said. "Used to be worse back before they put all those towers in. No reference points, just gray. My uncle swore he used to hear folks on the CB back then that weren't there, telling him about bends in the road, slick spots, all that. Then they had that convoy wreck. After that, everybody heard something different." He shrugged. "They say once you've run a road enough times, part of you stays on it. Maybe that's all it is." Back on the highway, under a sky that had lightened by a shade and forgotten about fog for the moment, Nate thumbed the CB dial down a notch, listening. The turbine corridor lay behind him, its red lights now just a memory. But in the quiet spaces between other people's chatter, he thought he could still hear a faint, familiar undertone. A low, steady hum, like blades cutting air far away. And on other nights, on other roads where fog pooled low and the world narrowed to his own small circle of light, a calm voice would sometimes slip onto the channel for a mile or two. A mention of a sudden curve, a note about a patch of black ice. Never much, just enough. Enough to make him feel that somewhere out ahead, or just a little way off to the side. Another rig paced him through the white, unseen and unhurried, making sure the road stayed a road, and not a place where you disappeared into the turning of the dark. Story number 9. By the time Sam crossed the county line, the rain had thinned to a fine mist that the wind smeared across the windshield in soft, diagonal strokes. The night had settled into that deep, hushed hour when most of the world was asleep, and the highway belonged almost entirely to the long-haul rigs and the few restless cars sliding through the dark. His truck moved steadily along the old turnpike, the engine's low growl a constant undercurrent. Overhead, the sky was a uniform slate, the stars smothered by cloud. On either side, the landscape had grown featureless, flat fields, dark woods, the occasional low rise where trees huddled together against the wind. The signs by the shoulder were fewer now, the exits farther apart. The dashboard clock read 3:11 a.m. He rolled his shoulders to ease the stiffness and took a slow sip from his travel mug. The coffee had gone lukewarm, but the taste was familiar and grounding. Ahead, the road narrowed slightly, the concrete barriers creeping closer as the turnpike funneled through a shallow cut in the land. Thin, low fog began to gather, first in the median, then along the shoulders. It drifted up from the drainage ditches like something breathing, spilling softly over the rumble strips and pooling on the road surface. In the truck's headlights, it glowed faintly, a slow-moving sheen that turned the asphalt into a muted gray river. Sam eased off the accelerator a touch, letting the speed settle a few miles per hour lower. The rig responded with a gentle, compliant shift in tone. The wipers clicked to a slightly faster rhythm, smearing the mist into clear arcs. Beyond the beam of his lights, the world diminished, the edges softening as the fog thickened. A large green sign rose out of the white like a ghost ship's sail. Toll Plaza, 2 miles, it announced in bold white letters. Below, in smaller print, cash/ticket/easy PSS. The reflective paint splashed his headlights back at him before slipping away again into the gray. Sam frowned slightly. He thought he'd already passed the last active toll plaza on this run. The newer section of road ahead was supposed to be all electronic gantries and overhead sensors. His GPS map showed nothing special at the 2-mile mark, just a long, straight stretch leading toward the state line. But maps lagged behind construction sometimes, and the old turnpike had been in a state of gradual upgrade for years. Fog climbed higher, to mid-door height on the few passing cars, blurring their shapes. The sodium vapor lamps that lined the highway became hazy orbs, their poles devoured by white. The median barrier vanished into a soft wall of light. The road itself shrank to 2 lanes and then 4 again, subtle shifts that felt more significant in the tightened world of mist. Another sign, Toll Plaza 1 2-mile, left lanes 4 easy PSS, right lanes 4 cash. Arrows spread across the diagram of lanes, a simple map hovering in the glowing air. The CB mumbled quietly, then cleared. A voice drifted in, male, low, with an easy cadence. "Common up on the old gate, fog thick as stew," it said. "Keep your ticket handy northbound." Sam's thumb brushed the mic, but he didn't pick it up. "Old gate," he murmured to himself. The phrase nagged at some half-memory. He could see more light ahead now, a wash of white and pale amber spreading across the fog, not the harsh brilliance of an overhead gantry, but the more concentrated glow of a cluster of lamps closer to the ground. The road markers on the pavement began to change. Arrows, lane designations, a sprayed-on reminder to slow. The highway widened, sprouting extra lanes. Concrete barriers flared outward. In the distance, half smothered by fog, the silhouette of a toll plaza emerged, a low, linear structure spanning all lanes, its roofline dotted with fixture lights. Each booth was a faint shape beneath it, divided into separate openings with hanging signs indicating their use. Sam blinked, surprise tugging at him. The old-style plaza was unmistakable, the kind with individual booths and striped arms. He hadn't seen one in operation on this route in years. Further up the turnpike, they'd all been replaced by sleek metal gantries that scanned transponders and plates without anyone needing to slow down. But this one stood solidly in the mist, painted signs still legible, lane arrows still bright. His truck's tag should clear him through any active gate, but the idea of barreling under an unexpected overhead bar without knowing if it would lift did not appeal. He let the rig slow, moving toward one of the center lanes where a sign overhead still read Easy PSS in faded purple letters. To the right, old glass booths with cash here and TICKETS glowed softly, though he saw no movement inside. As he rolled nearer, the details sharpened. The roof over the plaza was low and slightly stained, concrete darkened by age and weather. The lamps dangling from it buzzed faintly, their light warmer than the highway's sodium glow. The stripes on the raised arms were chipped, edges worn. The fog around the booths swirled lazily, dragged and reshaped by the trucks passing. He saw, with a faint tightening in his chest, that one of the booths, a central one marked TICKETS, was occupied. A figure stood inside, behind the glass, a man in a light-colored shirt, a dark tie, a reflective vest half-zipped over it. His hair was neatly combed back, his features indistinct at this distance. A soft yellow lamp illuminated his little compartment, painting everything in gentle hues. Sam's lane, beneath the Easy PSS sign, had no attendant. The arm was up, ready. He could have rolled through with only a slight tap of the brakes. Instead, some quiet impulse guided his hands. He signaled, eased the rig across the painted chevrons into the cash lane beside it. The booth's small, square window faced his side. The striped arm ahead was lowered. He brought the truck to a smooth stop, glad of the chance to stretch his fingers from the wheel for even a few seconds. The man inside the booth stepped closer, into clearer view. He looked to be in his late 50s or early 60s, though the soft booth light made it hard to pin down. Lines gathered around his eyes and mouth in a way that suggested long hours of both tiredness and quiet humor. A narrow nameplate was pinned to his vest. The letters were too small to read from where Sam sat. The laminated sign taped to the window listed toll prices that were slightly lower than Sam expected, and conspicuously lacked any mention of electronic surcharges. The attendant reached for the sliding drawer below the glass but paused, peering up at Sam instead. His gaze flicked once to the truck's logo, to the license plate, then to Sam's face. "Even in," he said through the small speaker grill. His voice was amplified just enough to be heard over the idle. It carried a rasp, like someone who'd inhaled a lot of exhaust in late nights. "Fog's come down hard, huh?" "Yeah," Sam said, leaning a little closer to hear better. "Wasn't in the forecast." "Fog doesn't bother with forecasts," the man said, the corner of his mouth twitching. "You got a ticket." Sam frowned. "Didn't get one when I came on," he said. "New gantries down the line. I've got a transponder." The attendant nodded once, as though confirming something he already knew. "You came on after they shut down the last gate then," he said. "No matter, we'll square it by distance." He held out a hand, not for money, but in a small, almost formal gesture. "Mind if I see your log?" The request was unusual enough to give Sam pause. He hesitated, then reached for his electronic log tablet, half expecting the man to clarify that he meant something else. But the attendant waited patiently, eyes kind and unhurried. Sam held up the screen. The attendant leaned forward, his gaze skimming over numbers and lines of text through the glass. For a moment, his expression went distant, as if he were seeing something more than what was written there. "Been a long stretch since you talked to anyone," he observed quietly. "Miles blur on you like this." Sam thought of the last few hours. The empty lanes, the hollow hum of tires on old concrete, the way the fog had crept and thickened without him quite registering how much the world had shrunk. "Kinda," he admitted. The attendant's eyes met his again. There was nothing uncanny in them, just a steady, human attentiveness. "You're good," he said. "Little ahead of schedule, if anything." He reached toward his side, and the metal drawer below the window clicked softly and slid outward toward Sam. On it lay a small, rectangular ticket, old-style, thick paper, printed with the Turnpike's logo at the top. A time stamp sat at the bottom, inked in faint purple, a time from several minutes in the future. Sam blinked. The clock on his dash disagreed by just enough to make him think. "Keep that," the attendant said. "Shows you where you are, not where you thought you were. Fog'll make you lose track." Sam picked up the ticket. The paper felt slightly rough, not the slick, thermal kind used now. He turned it over. In one corner, written in neat pen, was a mile marker number and the words "Watch right shoulder." He looked up. "What's at that mile?" he asked. The attendant glanced up at some point beyond the cab into the fog-thickened lane stretching away. His jaw tightened very slightly, then relaxed. "Used to be a low spot," he said. "Water'd collect there, black ice in winter, hydroplane in summer. They fixed the drainage, mostly, but habit's a strong thing. Folks still get pulled there when they're tired." He nodded toward the miles ahead. "You'll feel it when you get there, just don't follow it." The striped arm in front of Sam's truck shuddered and then rose slowly, until it stood vertical, fog slicking its worn paint. The green light beside the booth, smaller and older than the LED indicators at newer plazas, flicked from red to soft emerald. "You're clear," the attendant said. "Plaza's closed on the books these days, but some nights the road remembers needing a gate. Gives folks a chance to stop, even just for a breath." Sam slid the ticket into the sun visor, where old receipts and fuel slips lived for a while before he cleaned them out. He felt a curious reluctance to toss this one aside. "Thanks," he said. "You here every night?" "When I'm needed," the man replied. "You watch yourself out there. Fog's fond of company but not careful with it." The rig rolled forward. As the hood passed under the low roof, the light above changed quality, diffused, almost warm. The fog thickened for a moment, swirling in the intersection of the plaza's lights and his own beams. Then he was through, back on open lanes. The lamps behind him faded almost immediately. In the mirrors, the toll plaza was a brief smudge of yellow in a sea of white, then nothing at all. The overhead sign a mile later read tolling by plate only, "Do not stop." He glanced at the ticket again. The stamped time now matched the clock exactly. Fog wrapped the highway in a close embrace. The world beyond his headlights shrank again, the turnpike's gentle grooves guiding him forward. He watched the mile markers as they came and went, the numbers small but legible in the diffuse light. At the mile scrawled on the back of the ticket, he felt it, a subtle, almost imperceptible lean in the truck, as if the right side of the road dipped just a hair lower. The fog was thicker here, mounded on the shoulder, a denser bank that seemed to pull the edge of his vision toward it. The steering wheel tugged under his hands, not from wind or grade, but from some faint trick of perception. It would have been easy in a moment of inattention to follow that suggestion, to drift a few inches too far right over the rumble strip, tires hissing on slick, unseen standing water. He held the lane instead, muscles firm but not tense, eyes on the center of the beam. The feeling of pull lessened. The fog on the shoulder folded back into itself, just another patch among many. In his visor, the corner of the ticket peeked out, the inked reminder catching the glow from the dash. At the next service plaza, bright and modern with its glass atrium and chain restaurant logos, he fueled and asked the cashier, a young woman scrolling through her phone, about any older toll booth still in use down the line. She shook her head without looking up. "They shut the last of those down a few years ago," she said. "All camera now. My dad talks about the gates, though. Says he used to throw quarters into the baskets just to hear 'em hit." "What about that low spot?" Sam asked, giving the mile number. "Drainage problem there." That made her pause. "Before my time," she said slowly. "But yeah, I've heard them mention it. Had a few bad accidents there back in the day. Folks hitting pooled water at speed. They did some work on it. Still see the odd fender bender in heavy rain or fog. It's like the road remembers how to be slick there." Back in his cab, Sam took the ticket from the visor. The paper looked no different in the plaza's fluorescent light than any old receipt. The logo at the top was a version the turnpike had phased out years ago. The attendant's name, finally clear when he tilted it just right, stirred no recognition, but something about the looping letters felt oddly personal. He thought about tossing it, then slid it instead into the logbook's inner pocket, where he kept small, unimportant things that stayed with him longer than they needed to. Later runs took him past that stretch again on other foggy nights. No toll plaza appeared, only the silent skeletons of overhead gantries, their cameras blind in the white. Yet sometimes, when the mist thickened just so and the hour grew thin, the CB would crackle with a low, steady voice reminding some unseen driver to watch their wheels at a certain mile, to keep to the center when the fog tried to coax them toward the edge. And whenever the world outside the windshield shrank to a dim, drifting tunnel and the loneliness of the road drew in like another kind of fog, Sam would reach up and touch the folded edge of that old ticket, feeling the small, rough weight of it. A quiet proof that somewhere between maps and miles, there were still places where the highway itself set out a gatekeeper on the thickest nights, not to take anything from the drivers passing through, but to make sure they arrived, solid and unpulled on the other side.